So I am going to introduce Dr. Niamh Shaw. Niamh and I actually met on a radio program quite a while ago. It's been a while now. And she is a fantastic and amazing person who is a PhD in science. She is a space journalist, a space communicator, has participated in multiple analog adventures where she's had a chance to live as though she were on space, thus the life in space thing. And we are very excited to have her here today. She's going to be talking to us about her recent experiences, including one that was indeed very recent. And Niamh, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Hello, Dina. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be at Roger That. And congratulations on another successful program, a really, really exciting one. So yeah, my name is Niamh. Hello. And I'm coming to you live from Ireland. It's 3:03 p.m. here. I know it's earlier for some of you over on the East Coast, where Dina is and everybody. I'm from Ireland, obviously. Cork is where I am at the moment, which is, they say Ireland is like a bear. So like if you look at Ireland, it kind of has a head, it has two hands and it has 2 feet down the bottom. So Cork is sort of its little butt. It's kind of its butt. It's in the center of its butt. That's where Cork is. And Dublin, which is the capital, is sort of in its shoulder of its head here. So I'm down by the teddy bear's butt. And I'm delighted to speak with you today. And Dina kind of captured everything really well. So I'm always keen to get going. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a little bit of a tiny talk about where I was recently, but I'm going to focus mainly on Mars, this one particular analog mission that I took, which kind of changed everything for me and kicked me into kind of combining climate change with the planet, with everything kind of all came in at once. And I rarely get the chance to talk about this in depth. So I'm really looking forward to having a chance to talking to you about it today. So let me share my screen and I'll get going.
And hopefully this will work well. And it looks like we're good.
Excellent. Yeah. Oh, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop that. I'm going to make sure I'm going to record the audio thing, share sound. That's the thing I always forget. So I'm going to do that again. Okay. All right. So here I am. Let me just give you a quick background. So this is, I let these images just go. I'm a visual person, so I always have to have images. So yeah, I've been doing this. I've been a science communicator like full time now for probably since 2008. But since 2014, I've really been focusing on the message of space and trying to connect it with, I guess, being the best possible version of ourselves and daring to want something that goes beyond what everyday life tells you that you deserve. And for me, it's about reporting from space, communicating from space. And that's what this image you're looking at now kind of captures. That was taken at the European Space Agency's technology and a test center, ESTEC in Noorwegen in the Netherlands. And it was the first time I was there. And a lot of things started kicking off at the same time. Like what Dina said, I'm an engineer and scientist. I'm also, I stepped away from full-time academia in 2003, and I became an actor and writer full-time until around about 2008. And I was all of those things. It took me a long time to figure out who I was, and I realized I'm equally creative as I am logistical, as all of us are. It's just all about life choices and what we choose to make our career. I just wanted everything. And so it took me a little bit longer than most to figure out, what really drives me. And then in all that, when I started combining the two, my passion for space came to the fore again. It was something that I always was passionate as a kid, but in terms of making a career out of it, I just couldn't see that in my line of sight for many, many years. So I started this kind of in my 40s, this idea of reporting, being a space reporter. And so, things can't happen quickly enough for me. And I like pushing the boundaries of, who gets to say who deserves what, who gets to say what life we have. All here and are and what we are not. And so my work explores that as a human being. It explores the human element of science So everything I go about reporting on, I come at it from, I'm not supposed to be here, but this is what I'm seeing kind of attitude, and then building science behind that. Because I think there are many people out there that haven't been lucky as I have, which, you know, in my house, we always talked about science. And so science comes with a pedagogy, but it comes with a whole vocabulary that can be exclusive to those who don't have it. So I try to humanize science. I try to bring it to places. I put myself in extreme environments and I talk about them as a person that's just going through this experience, and then science comes after that. So what I'm going to talk to you about today are some of those things. So now my life is fantastic. I get to report about launches for the European Space Agency. Here I am at NASA Kennedy outside the Vehicle Assembly Building. I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. That's, you know, where they put the Saturn V together and Space Launch System was like, ah. I saw the Space Launch System roll out of there on St. Patrick's Day 2 years ago. Amazing. I was in Africa last year. Again, this was a Mars analog. So this is the salt pan, the Makati salt pan in Botswana, which is part of a massive national park. So during the rainy season, loads of people go there on safari to look at all the wild animals and stuff. And then in the dry season, scientists kind of move in. And it's a Mars analog because there are formations, these kind of mounds in the middle of this salt bed that have kind of grasses, and it's like they're like dunes, except they're really hard. And they're an indicator that there could be an aquifer underneath. And so I worked with a team of scientists, and they were using this long snake-like thing that was sending radar down in, at timed intervals to see what was underneath the surface. And we walked over the mounds. We kind of tracked the whole of the salt pan, and they were trying to come up with a method to prove that, you know, when you have these mounds, they're an indication that there's water underneath, because they have found similar formations on the surface of Mars. And so if they can prove it here, then maybe they will develop an instrument that they could put on board one of the science rovers in the future, or perhaps a human mission that could do the same. So that was amazing. And that is a line that we saw literally after killing a zebra just a few yards from us. It's a bit scary. That's another day. Like what Adina had just told you, I've just come back from here. A whole walk about Antarctica, and I do believe it is very closely connected to space. It was an incredible mission. I was with 100 other women scientists. We were working together for 2 years online. It's an Australian initiative called Homeward Bound Projects. For any women in science listening today, you can apply. They want to basically empower women in science to stand up and speak up. And we were all fascinated about climate change. So they chartered a ship for us to go on expedition around the Antarctic waters. It was just incredible. You can ask me after the talk if you want me to talk some more about it. Amazing. I can share pictures too if we have time afterwards. But really what I want to talk about is this, because this was the game changer for me. So as I say, I was a science communicator. I'd rediscovered space in 2014. I'd written my second theatre show about it. The following year, I participated in the International Space University's Space Studies program. And it was the first time I felt that my skills as, with this logical brain of having a background in science and engineering, and then this writer and this kind of artistic kind of aesthetic kind of came together, and they really thought it was a great idea. And that particular year, which was 2015, we participated in the program in Ohio in partnership with NASA at Glen and Pinebrook. And there were a lot of engineers and scientists on the program as well, who were way more ahead of me in terms of what they wanted to do with regard to their interest around space. And they were determined for our year to have our own Mars analog. And so I was invited as the artist to be a part of their Mars analog. And there were 5 of us. There were supposed to be 6 of us, but the 6th guy was delayed slightly. And because of that, he never actually made it in, because it was a very difficult place to get to. It was in the middle of the Utah desert. It's a facility run by the Mars Society, the Mars Desert Research Station. I'm sure many of you have heard of it before. So I went in 2017. And you know what? I still talk about it because it had a profound effect on me for so many reasons. But let me take you through the mission first. We were the 173rd crew 173. So there were 172 crews before. So this facility has been running since the 2000s. So what happens is when you arrive The existing crew is still there. They pick you up from the nearest town, Hanksville, which is in the middle of nowhere, and about a 4 hour drive from Grand Junction, which is where I got my bus from Denver. And you do a swap over the next day. So this was like our fundraiser page. And I showed this, I think it was like December 2016, before I went, about what we were going to do. And so to apply, we had to have a legitimate kind of science experiment, and we also had a fairly comprehensive artistic objective as well. And we were accepted, and we had to submit all sorts of paperwork. And we agreed that when we were there, we would have to produce daily reports. So you had a commander's report, you had the Greenhab report, which is like the greenhouse health and safety report, engineer's report, crew journalist report. That was my one, crew journalist, talk every day. We had two main experiments. One was to see if we could 3D print a brick, a kind of a modular brick system, very much like Lego bricks, and fill them. There were two chambers in them. One was filled with water, one was filled with soil. I'll talk about that in a while. The second one was conduct a comparative study between germinating spinach. There were spinach plants under artificial light, a wavelength that was kind of like in the pink range, and then in the greenhab or in the greenhouse. And the third one then was that was what I was in charge of, was basically just capture the experience as much as possible from start to finish, so that we had loads of content that we could share when we came back from our mission to schools or whatever. And we took one or two phone calls when we were there from schools in France, schools in Israel, and one in Slovakia. So that was our remit. Like many of the crew missions at the Mars Desert Research Station, they're all usually about 15 days or sols in length. We talk about sols on Mars because a day on Mars is slightly longer than a day slightly shorter than a day on Earth. And a year on Mars is nearly 2 years on Earth. So if this were a legitimate mission, it would take 7 minutes, at least 7 to 8 minutes, if you were to send a text for it to reach Earth, and then a further 7 to 8 minutes for it to get back. So we always respected that time distance when we were making reports. Also, if you were to go on a mission to Mars, if you think about the location of where Earth is in relation to the sun and Mars, Mars has a longer year than Earth because it takes much longer to go around the sun than it does with Earth. So if you were to go to Mars, you would wait until the two planets are very close together. That's 7 months. And then the next time that they're going to be at the same space is basically 667 days later, which is another year on Mars, which is almost 2 years. So that's why they say it takes between 7 months to 2 years to get to Mars. This is my crew, crew 173. So from the right, you have Roy Naur, who's just, he completed his PhD there in geology, I think late last year. He was really interested in the geology of Mars. And then the tall gentleman just beside him to his left is Richard Blake from Australia, who studied astrobiology. And then between Rick and Roy is Michaela Musilova from Slovakia. She'd be very well known in the analog Mars kind of world. She went on to become director of High Seas, which is another analog facility in Hawaii, which at the time I think was running NASA experiments. I think at the moment it's now kind of turned into more of a freelance sort of facility. And then beside me, we have Idris Said, who is French Moroccan, and he was an engineer. Michaela, by the way, is an astrobiologist. And then Idris was interested he had designed a generator that was solar powered, and he wanted to have a proof of concept of that. But unfortunately, he couldn't get his test model through customs. So we all kind of focused on the two main experiments, the 3D printing of the bricks. And the idea would be that we would build a wall. And then the second one would be growing plants on Mars. And then there was me. I was in charge of all the gathering of the whole experience from start to finish. And that's what I wanted to do. France, Israel, Australia, Ireland, and Slovakia. And we would regularly take these official pictures. This was our official picture of the crew waving our flags. And this is the Mars Desert Research Station from a distance. This was actually taken on our very last day. So we had handed over to Crew 174 at this stage. But you live as if you're on Mars here. So basically what that means is Crew 172, they finish their mission when you arrive effectively. And then you have this sort of loose time where there's this handover where they go through everything that they learned while they were there. They give you all the shortcuts and stuff, and they take you through all the processes that you have to monitor while you're there. And then they leave. They left us on a Sunday morning. And from when they go, we're on sim. And so that meant that every time we went outside, we suited up and we wore the spacesuits that were created by the Mars Society that were on site. We also had a ration of water, and that was the only water that we got to use the whole time we were there. And we also had a ration of food, which was given to us at the start of our mission. And all of the crews are that way. So this is the exterior of the facility. That's me doing one of my many movies and waving my Irish flag. And the globy thing at the start, that's the science lab. It was very good, very well equipped. I'll show you the inside of it now in a second. I've got some footage of that. So this is me walking up to the facility. So it was 2 stories. You have the ground floor where you had the airlock at the front. That was like the airlock that you would use to come in and come out of the building. And at the back, there was another airlock, an engineer's airlock. So that would take you to your water. We would have to monitor our water every day and also our power usage, and you would go out the engineer's airlock. The see-through building that you see there, that's the green hab or the greenhouse. And that's where one half of our experiment about growing food on Mars happened. And then you see a kind of a half a tunnel. So that's the only place that you can walk on during mission that you're not going to break sim if you don't wear a suit. And so that was the only place that we didn't need to suit up if we were going outside. So this was our life. So Crew 172 left. And I found them to be a little bit kind of crazy. They kept asking us about our food, which was kind of scary because you were kind of going like, why are they asking us about our food? But of course, in a very short period of time why they were asking you about your food, because that becomes a massive part of your experience of what food you had. And they were kind of so hyper excited about leaving the next day. I can remember kind of going, gosh, that's really weird. And thinking, we're not going to be like that, Now, I didn't really know these people that I was going on. We had done the space studies program together, 4 of us. Rick, the tall guy from Australia, he had done it the year before. But they weren't the people I kind of hung out with. I was very quiet during the space studies program, and I kind of hung out with 2 people, and that was it. So I was markedly older than them because, like I say, I started a lot older than people. So I was really worried about my own space. I was worried about how I was going to get on with a younger group of people. I had never done anything like this before. A lot of them had, like the geologists and the astrobiologists, they're all used to working in the field. I'd never done anything like this before. So these were the worries that I had. This is the schematic of MDRS. So you've got the ground floor, and then you've got the upper floor. And then up on the upper right, they have the layout of the sleeping areas, which they were called kind of staterooms. And you'll see these in the movie. So you see the airlock for EVAs, or space walks, as we call them, and you would prepare for your space walks there. Then kind of you had a lab area, and you had all your tools and everything there in the centerpiece. Then down the back of the workshop, then you had the toilet and you had the shower, which we didn't use. We didn't shower for the whole time we were there. The airlock then would take you outside to the water. The water was pumped in to like a cistern in the top of the upper area. The upper area had a dining area. It had a kind of a seating that you would do your work on, and you would also work a lot on the kitchen table as well, or the dining table. And then you had a fitted kind of kitchen. And there was these crazy stairs that went from the ground floor to the top floor. They were really vertical, and they were kind of like they weren't really stairs. They were like a ladder, but the ladder was kind of cut in half. So you had half a step. So if you lined it up right, you could fly up the stairs and fly down the stairs. But if you were off at all, you could really hurt yourself, which I did all the time. This is the exterior of the habitat. So this is the tunnel thing that I'm talking about. So you could walk through there without suiting up. That was the only place that you could suit up. And you'll see how mucky the ground was. So that was a dry day. But if it rained at all, oh, so slippy. Your boots would be covered in this red muck that smelled of sulfur. It was pretty disgusting. This is the science lab. So it was really well equipped. You had a laminar flow area, you had a wet lab. We had all the sieves that we used for kind of categorizing the different soil sizes. You had graduated cylinders, you had Petri dishes. And this was the view, and you would sit there and you would do your experiments. It really did feel like you were in Mars when you look outside because it was so barren. And of course, there's no one for miles and miles and miles. Like this is on private, government-owned land, and there isn't anyone around. So if anything goes wrong, it does take quite a long time to help. This is the engineering dock. So you see there are two tanks of water, and you would pump it into that blue tank there, and that would be that you would have. And you go in this back door here, your boots off there. You weren't allowed to bring your boots any clearer. And then you would come into this area here. So this was our pink experiments where we were growing food on Mars. You close that second door. Just to the left of that was the toilet and the shower. And then in on the right is the entrance to the other airlock, or the EVA airlock, as we call it, or the spacewalk airlock. And I'm just going to turn on the light there. And there was a little porthole there. This is all the equipment that you needed to suit up. So you had a boiler suit, which is like this here. So every crew has their own colors and their own mission patch. This was our mission patch here. And yeah, and you can see that that's where you stood up. Then this is the area where the experiments are. This was crazy stairs. I fell so many times down this stairs, you have no idea. So if you get it, it's fine. But if you're off, like, you'll fall. And this is the upstairs area. So again, you can see that we all have our own little staterooms or our sleeping area. You're going to go in there in a second. The steps up there are to the cistern, and you'd have to pump water from that outside blue tank up to there every day. And it was a pretty basic pump then that would pump to the taps. I'll talk about that in a second. Kitchen area, and then this was my room. So I was packed to capacity with equipment for this mission because you had to bring a sleeping bag, a pillow, and everything. So I only had room for 2 pairs of trousers and 4 tops. And everything else was my computer gear, my camera gear, and vitamins. That's all I brought. And loads of layers, like thermals and stuff. That was it. That's all I brought. And kitchen was fine. I don't think this is what a kitchen on Mars would look like because we had a coffee maker and everything. But we had to really monitor our water usage because we had such limited water. Our food was dried food. There was a few fresh items that we put with us that ran out after a few days. This is dried egg, but there would also be dried onion, dried broccoli, dried sausage, dried potato, dried cheese, dried butter, dried orange juice, dried milk. You'd add water to everything. Water became really important really quickly. And it's something that I never really thought about before, was how much water I use on a daily basis. And I've actually never forgotten the lesson that I learned on that mission. My stateroom, you can see that I slept on the top side of this box. So I slept on the top side of this box that bisected the room to my left. That's where Rick slept. And so Rick slept on the inside interior of that box, and I slept on the outside exterior of it, if you know what I mean. So like they were kind of 2 sort of bunk beds, very smart. But because I slept on the upper one, we had heating by night, which was like a gas propane heater. And so heat rises. And I would be gasping because the air was so hot and so dry. I'd wake up every morning really, really thirsty. And I'd go to the tap to drink water. And I was told pretty soon, you can't just be glugging back the water, Niamh. We're monitoring our water usage. So, and similarly, there was only so much coffee you could make. You would use as little water as possible for washing up. We didn't flush the toilet for number 1s. We only flushed the toilet for number 2s, which meant, and the pump itself that pumped water to the taps, to the greenhouse, to the toilet, to the sink, to the shower, which we didn't really use, was really basic. And obviously it was like a suction system. So it would suck and spit, and it would make this honking noise. And I only mention it because the honking noise you could count and you would know how much water was being used. for every hunk, it was like a splat. So go, So I got up in the morning and I put the tap on. And like for this amount of water, you might get like, I would say 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe get about 10 splats for that. So you learn very quickly how to measure water, and you became really aware very quickly how much water you had left. So it meant that we became very economical, and we kept an eye on each other, and we didn't let each other away with drinking too much water. And flushing the toilet was hilarious because you would know if somebody went for a number 2 because it would be the only time you'd flush the toilet. And it's funny, I got very used to being able to make that amount of water work. So you go to the loo, that's fine. Then you'd wash your hands under the tap. And like for me, 3 splats would be enough. Like, I'd be able to wash my hands with soap, and then another 2 to rinse them, and you were done. Brushing your teeth, 1 splat for brushing your teeth. You turn it off, another splat for rinsing your mouth. Washing up, maybe about 10 splats. So it was just like splats. So that's how I kind of learned splats. And I adjusted within about 2 days with that. And that's what I found amazing about this experience, was how quickly I adjusted to life without the usual creature comforts or living in the extremes. I'll get back to that. First, let's talk about the 2 experiments. So the first one was building homes on Mars. So this, we decided that the parameters was we were going to use whatever was there, because if we were left on Mars, that's exactly what would happen. You would have to make do. And I actually really liked that about MDRS because it had been working for 20 years. Nothing really kind of worked properly. So you would go to do something and you would expect it would only take you 20 minutes, but it ended up taking about 2 hours and 20 minutes because the thing you were trying to work on would be broken in some shape or form. Our spacesuits, some worked, some didn't. I'm going to when I suit up, I'll explain how they all worked. And this was the 3D printer that was at the facility. And so we used that, and we used whatever filament that they had there. And they happened to have this bright green filament, white filament, and black filament. And that's what we used. And Idris and Roy, that was their main responsibility when they were there, particularly Idris here. And he had terrible problems trying to get the 3D printer to work. This was the printer, this was the brick design. And with that printer, we had estimated that it should take 17 hours for one of those bricks to print. So it was supposed to take 17 hours for one of those bricks to print, but it would be so affected by the cold. The printer was in the science lab, and we took it out of the science lab and we put it downstairs in the main habitat area. And it worked a little bit better that way, but it used to drive Idris crackers. So this is what they look like. So you can see that you get the kind of the 2 nodules on the top, like a Lego brick. So each of the bricks would build on top of each other. And there was 2 chambers in it. One was for water to insulate, because you need to insulate your walls when you're on Mars because you're going to be exposed to a lot more radiation. And then the second part was for soil, so that you would actually have weight and ballast, and it would actually, be a good, it would be good, strong kind of material to build walls with. So we had estimated that over the 15 days, if the bricks took 17 hours to build, that we would probably have at least 20 bricks. And then what we could do is we could build a wall as proof of concept and say, there you go. When you're living on Mars, you don't need to bring anything with you. As long as you have a 3D printer and we can make filament from something on Mars, you can build homes. And that's what we wanted to do. So the other part of that was the soil part of it. So we would go out, a lot of our EVAs or our spacewalks were about collecting samples from an astrobiological point of view, from a geological point of view, but also for actually filling the bricks that we were building. So there was a lot to it. And Rick and Roy spent a lot of time looking at different rock samples to see if there were carbonates present, because seemingly that's a sign that there'd be water. And this is the kind of things that you would build on Mars. That is the sum total of bricks we managed to print while we were there. And we never stopped. Idris never gave up. And it's a reflection. So that's 1 3/4 bricks, by the way. It's a reflection of when you try to do something outside the comforts of buildings and structures with wired electricity and running water and all these things, everything gets really difficult. And so we ran into problems because of the cold there and the fact that the printer was quite limited in its capacity. And so after a grueling 15 days ourselves, this was all we had for our proof of concept. So in fairness to them, they went out, they built a wall, and we completed our part of the experiment. But it was very important for us to acknowledge that you're estimating something for a set amount of time, but with everything with space, everything about space is hard. Then the growing food on Mars was the second experiment that we ran. So this is Rick here. That was Rick's real, he's amazing. He's really green fingers. So he was always in the green hub. And before we went in on our mission, we decided that we would pick up some vegetables to grow in the green hub so that subsequent crews would have fresh fruit and vegetables like carrots and onions and tomatoes and things like that. So Rick spent a lot of time growing those and planting them and keeping an eye on them every day, and he would water them. He also had an experiment running. He also had an experiment. Oh, I don't know, there's some build on that. That's wrong. This is Michaela and the other half of the same experiment. So in the green hab, we had spinach seeds germinating, and then Michaela ran the same experiment without soil, with water that was seeded with nutrients required for spinach to germinate under the wavelength, that kind of pink wavelength of light. And we measured to what extent the spinach grown under the pink light behaved in comparison to in the green hab. And as you can imagine, they both germinated, but the efficacy was much less with the spinach. So if you were to grow plants on Mars or grow food on Mars, it would just take you a little bit longer. And it's all about what nutrients you put in the water as well. So that one was more successful. But the one thing about the growing all those fruit and veg and continuing the spinach study, we asked the crew that came after us, crew 174, if they would continue our experiment so that we would have more data over a long period of time, because 15 days isn't very much. And you're able to stay on the comms for a number of crews after you leave, and you can communicate and ask people to do different things with that. And in the midst, we lost contact with them and they forgot to water our plants. But not only that they forgot to water our plants, they forgot to water the carrots and the onions and the vegetables. So all that work that Rick did was for naught. And again, this is kind of what happens when you don't have the infrastructure and you're not around people and you're leaving them a message, and you've got to take this 8-minute delay between sending something and another 8 minutes before you get it back minimum. So all of those things lead to things being much more complicated and require a lot more advanced planning, a lot more training, a lot more communications. And you have to have all those systems in place if you want to actually achieve anything. Then the third thing, and the one thing I think, again, the water was one thing that stayed. And then the second thing was whenever we would go on an EVA or an extravehicular activity or a walk, a space walk. And this required you to wear the suit that was made by hand by the people running the Mars Desert Research Station. So it wasn't even a real spacesuit. It was a boiler suit like this. Like this is just made from like very thin material, which we brought with us. So this was like our outerwear. And then you had a helmet, which was plastic and a kind of a silver, not a silver, a steel collar. And then because the interior of the mask would condense with your breath, they had built a fan that had, you can see in that picture, it had a hose that would go into the side of your helmet and was supposed to blow in fresh air to stop the interior of your mask from condensing. It didn't really work, but you would wear it anyway, and you would have to charge them every night, and some of them worked better than others. So again, I liked this because this is very realistic of what life would be happening if you were on Mars. And so you would then go out and you would be wearing this equipment while you were trying to gather samples, while I was trying to take pictures I had an SLR camera, and I couldn't even, like, this is about as close as I could get it to, because I couldn't see, like, I couldn't get my head in any closer to the helmet. So it was just like I had it always on wide angle, and then kind of I'd cut into it afterwards. It would take two of us to help one person suit up, even though it wasn't a real suit, it was just this and the helmet. And you'd have to put a radio on, and you would have to wear heavy boots, and then you would have to wear heavy gloves. So you needed each other to put it on. So we timed it. One of the experiments that Roy had going from his students in Israel was, how long does it take to suit up? And so I think it starts with 40 minutes, and the quickest we got to, I think, was 35 minutes. And then you can see almost immediately your mask starts to kind of fog up. But you kind of live with it. And then you go out, and this is like the sum total of the vision. So you can see that my mask is quite foggy. And then you'd have to drive one of those bikes to get somewhere. And we're actually quite high up there. And I remember that day, oh my gosh, the terrain in the area, while it looks like Mars and it's red and stuff, it's actually quite sandy. So I was going up with all my camera gear, because my job was to take loads of, everybody was wearing a GoPro, which are those kind of portable cameras, and I had mics and everything on people. And so I would go out with them and try to make sure that everything was running fine. And they'd be flying up the hill ahead of me, because they're all used to doing this. I wasn't. I'm not great with heights. And so I tried to follow them, and I'd always fall behind them. And I actually partially got over my fear of heights, because I just couldn't get left behind. I had to do what they were doing. And I would do time lapses. This was a typical day in the lab, where people would be coming in and coming out, and there was a great atmosphere between us. Like, we got on really, really well. And we were, to overcome adversity, you can do one of two things. You can get frustrated and you could shout at everybody, or you can kind of find it funny and just go, oh, you know what can we do? There's nothing we can do. And we chose the latter. And we got quite close. We got really close. And it became like a real family. I think we took very good care of each other. So if somebody was out on EVA, it's freezing cold, because you're only wearing like a very thin piece of material. This not very heavy. And I'd always make them a cup of tea, and then you'd gather around the table, and people would have their reports and stuff to do. And so you only have each other for company. And we had a rota. And so we got up every morning at 7, and we would ask mission control if we could go out for an EVA if the weather was okay. And if they said okay, we decided who had to go out and what we had to do. I had to have loads of SD cards ready to go to put in people's GoPros, and different voice things as well. And so I had to have them wiped, all the GoPros charged. So I had all that ready to go. People would go out on EVA. We'd help them suit up. We'd keep an eye on them on the radios, because they had a radio to communicate with each other. Somebody was on lunch duty. Somebody made lunch. Then you might have a second EVA of the day, or we might have to fix something or repair something. And then we'd have our reports to do. And then it would be time for somebody to make dinner. So somebody would be making dinner while we were all working. And then we'd always have the evening to kind of, if there was something that we needed to finish, and I would always have more photographs and stuff to edit and to upload to Mission Control as part of my crew journalist summary. One day, a French news network came to visit, because people were really interested. At this stage, Mars was just starting to come back into the public domain. Nobody had really been talking about space exploration much before kind of 2015, 2016, since the space shuttle retired, but it kind of started ramping up again around that time. So they found the fact that we were doing a simulated Mars mission fascinating. So 2 French crew came to cover Idris and to cover us as a story. And they came in, it took them about a day and a half to find us. And they came in, and we made them, they joined us for lunch initially. And I could tell by the way they were around us that we were really smelly. And I hadn't really thought about us being smelly at all. But of course, we hadn't showered. And I remember they went off. They went with Michaela and Roy and Idris on an EVA, and myself and Rick stayed behind. And they came back in, and we had had lunch upstairs, and we invited them to come back upstairs, and they didn't want to come back upstairs. I think it's because it was really smelly up there. And so I said, oh, I'll make you a cup of coffee. And I brought down the cup of coffee. And as I was going back up those wonky stairs, I just looked back. They both looked at each other, and they looked at the coffee, and they kind of put it down. And I remember being really annoyed at them for judging us. You know what I mean? Like they hadn't experienced what we'd experienced. And I felt like kind of saying to them, you really need to consider what happens to you as a person when everything is taken away from you for 15 days and what you start to rely on, and you start to rely on each other. And the things that you think are important become less important. One night, Roy was cleaning his room and he brought out money, and it was only like day 5 or something, and he brought out dollars. And I can remember us going, money, that's mad. Like, because we hadn't needed money, hadn't even thought about money for days. And up until us meeting that crew that day and in Hanksville, everything was about money. Buying coffee, buying lunch, getting the bus, flying to Denver. And suddenly we were in a world where there was no money. And it made me think about all the stuff I had at home and how I hadn't really thought about it. And the only thing I missed really were people. And I really liked the freedom of that. I really, really did. And I thought there was a lot to be learned about it. I also became far more aware of the weather, of the terrain, of where we were. It was like I was getting more switched on to nature, the less kind of noise I had about stuff and infrastructure, which I found very easy.
Greetings from Crew
I would get
173.
us to,
We're getting a series of
we would
questions
we
from
started getting a
our
lot of questions
followers,
from people on
and so
Facebook.
we're going to try and answer all of them.
And
Hugh Burns,
I'm just
responses
gonna
has
silence that
Sam.
because I want to be able to talk over it. So I noticed that people were asking us like, oh, what's life like on Mars and stuff. And we really wanted to preserve that sense of a delay, that we were somewhere else. We weren't just in America and a phone call away, that we were at least 7 minutes away. So what we would do when we were answering the questions was
if we went going outside the main door,
we would use the radio as a way of making it feel like
atmosphere
we were
is really
somewhere
harsh.
else.
How does that feel? It kind of reminds me diving, because you are physically cannot do everything you like, and you can't see everything, and you get foggy in the mask.
And so that's how we dealt with it, and it worked. People really felt that we were somewhere else, and it was important for me to do that, to kind of protect the feeling that we were trying to make people feel about our experience. This is the tank. I could do a whole show about this tank. This is the tank that was on top of like a cistern, and there was a really basic switch that you pressed for it to fill from outside, this blue tube from outside. And if it got below that black line there, you wouldn't be able to. What would happen is that all the gunk that's in the bottom of that tank would then start to affect the filter, and the whole system would break down. And this is the infamous tank from which the pump that went from. And every day we would have to make sure that that water level was there, and everything became about the water. This was us in the evening doing our report. So this was like a nice time where you had your work done. You were kind of warming up from being outside. Every one of us had at least one report to do every day. So we would do that. And then around about 6 o'clock, whoever was down for dinner, a rota for dinner, then we would do that. And so if you had been out on EVA, the people that were left behind, we'd always try to have a treat or something ready for people when they came back in. And yeah, and like I said, dinners became a massive part of our shared experience, and we became a family, really. We started kind of developing shorthand across the radio. Roy was really good at making the sound of a peacock, so that became our noise for dinner. He would just go like this crazy kind of noise of a peacock, and we'd know that it would be time to to come in for dinner. The ritual was lovely, and the conversations that we had were just terrific, and that was enough. That would just get us through. That would just get us through every day. And you would have some days where you were just like so tired, so dehydrated, that it would just be like, so you just really didn't want to do another day of this. And you would always be energized by your team. Your crew would always kind of help you get through it somehow. And we were lucky. We didn't really have any rows or arguments. Like there were days where I wanted to kill people, but what I would do is I would just step out Rick had a very calm energy. So I would just say, Rick, do you mind if I just sit with you for a bit? And he'd go, yeah, sure, no problem, Niamh. And I wouldn't talk. I wouldn't tell him what was wrong. And I would just like try and kind of just calm down by just sitting beside him. And I didn't tell anybody how I was feeling. And I would just get through it and pass through. And all of us had tough days. You know, it wasn't easy. But the last day came. This is us on the very last day. And on the last day, you have to clean everything and make sure it's spotless. And it gets it's checked. We all paid a deposit, I think, if I can remember rightly, to be there. And I think you don't get your deposit back if you don't leave the place clean. And so we cleaned the place from top to bottom. And that was the very last thing we did together as a team. And then suddenly crew 174 arrived, and it was time for us to hand over. And so suddenly we were able to go outside without wearing our spacesuits, which was really, really strange. And we were able to use the quad bikes without wearing our spacesuits, which was really, really strange. So all the rules were broken. And just like when we arrived, this is crew 174, we were handing over then, we were crew 173 handing over to crew 174. And they looked at us like we were mad, the same way I looked at crew 172 that night before and was worried about, you know, these people are insane. This isn't going to be us. We're not going to be insane. And we were exactly the same. We had created our own kind of shorthand. And I was so excited about going back to like real coffee and fresh food. And that last morning, we got up and we watched the sunrise together. Here we are watching the sunrise together. We spent the day together. We went to Hanksville and we had a cup of coffee and pancakes, which were amazing. In the cafe, it was Brenda's Diner or something. And I went to the bathroom before we got back in the SUV. And I went to the loo. It was only just number one. And so I was about to leave the toilet and realized, oh, I have to flush now. And I flushed the toilet. I can remember like just liters of water coming out, like just crazy amounts of water. And I went to wash my hands, and I'd been used to like just a splat, like 3 splats to wash my hands. And it was one of those timers, and it was just like all this water coming out. And I was there going, we are just seriously wasting water on this planet. Like it's crazy how much water we are wasting. And left them, and it was really hard to say goodbye to them. It was like a breakup. It was crazy. We've been through everything together, you know, and it was only 15 days. It was mad. It was like only 15 days. And I was so lonely those first few days. I went to New York and I had great plans that I was going to visit museums or everything. I didn't. I got sick. I got the flu, and everybody was looking for pictures and videos. So I was kind of helping everybody get these sort of press packs together. And I went back to Ireland into my apartment, and it just seemed enormous. It wasn't, but it seemed enormous. And I owned things like cushions and loads of towels and loads of linen. And I went, why do I have all this stuff? And I decided I was going to start living more simply and more minimally. And it took me about 3 years, and I eventually kind of gave away everything. And I only own now some kind of files and a few mementos and clothes. And I do that because I think we can learn a lot about, you know, taking better care of our planet and learning to live more sustainably in housing if we kind of look to space for answers, because space always has the answers, you know. So it ended up being an experience that far extended beyond what I thought it was going to be like. And when I shared the story with the general public, talking to them about blocked toilets and food and how close we got, always led to questions about science and space. And so it reinforced my idea about personalizing science for it to reach a wider audience. And so that mission was pivotal in me moving forward. And I've never forgotten it. And I've never lost contact with those 4 amazing people. So I'll leave it there and hand back to Dina.
Thank you so much, Niamh. Well, we don't really have time for questions, so I'm going to try to do a combo question. There were several questions. I'm going to give you everything and give you maybe a couple minutes to answer. about how much water the plants needed and whether there was a risk of dehydration. There were also questions about what we can learn from this kind of analog about space. And then another question that had to do with you were the 173rd crew and 174. Do people learn from each other? Or is everybody reinventing the wheel? Because it sounded like there were problems that should have been already taken care of.
I'll start with that one. Yeah, you're right. Everybody has their system, so they pass over. And the whole idea of the reports and the documenting is that you're supposed to be coming up with a process that worked. And it does in theory, but then certain crews have weird things that you do, and then you go, no, we're not doing that. So crew 172 told us to cover our our bowls and our plates with tin foil or aluminum foil. And they were saying that that would cut down on washing up. But then we were like, but then you're creating another problem, which is using all this aluminum foil. And if you cut into it, it kind of, the stuff goes under the plate anyway. So we gave up on that very, very quickly. But yeah, what they did, what their practices became our practices, and then we passed it on to 174. So yeah, you kind of learn by each other, but you forget so much as well, Dina, because so much is happening. The plants, yes, they were watered at the same time every day. And I can't remember how many mils there was, but we had a method and they were done at exactly the same time. They ended up, of course, getting dehydrated because they were in the next crew 174, they only halfway finished our experiment. So eventually everything kind of died. Did they risk dehydration? I don't believe so, but that was really Rick and Michaela's experiment more than mine. So I wasn't really that hands-on with it. I was more involved in the 3D printing and the cataloging the whole experience, archiving the whole experience from beginning to end. And what was your middle question? The middle question was about
the middle question. I think you kind of answered near the end anyway, which was how an experience like this helps people prepare for time and space.
I think it really does. But not only that, I think it helps us prepare for future living on Earth, actually, is what I learned from it, was that, if we can recreate, simple things about minimizing use of water in a desert in Utah, like it really makes you question how, I know we have an abundance of water in Ireland, but that doesn't mean we have to waste it. I think that there are smarter ways of doing it. And space, I think, more than anything, teaches us how to live more sustainably on Earth, because everything gets difficult the second you take a human off Earth. No oxygen, no gravity, no water, and no food, and no refuse collection system. So the whole idea of recycling and repurposing, I think we can learn an awful lot about how to live better on Earth. So yeah, and I do think the analogs help. For Michaela and Roy and Rick, who are astrobiologists and geologists, for them, it's the only time they can actually practice what they do, for an opportunity for them to actually conduct experiments on mission. That's the only way they can do it, So I think it does actually have a lot of benefits. And there are other analogs it's all about the spacesuit, like Amity, the Austrian Space Forum. Their whole thing is about designing a spacesuit that's fit for purpose. And they do analog after analog after analog to test that,
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing all this with us. For those of you in the meeting, our next talk is actually going to be about a very different analog in space. Niamh, this has been fantastic. I put the link to your website in the page, in the chat. And if people want to reach out to you, I'm sure that you can reach you through that. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day, and say hi to David. And we'll talk to you later.
All right. Bye, Roger that. Bye.
Bye.